Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoy. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is, once again, Dr. Karyne Messina. Dr. Messina is a clinical psychologist and supervising and training analyst at the Washington Baltimore Center for Psychoanalysis and is on the medical staff of Johns Hopkins Medicine in Bethesda, Maryland. She maintains a full-time practice in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Dr. Messina is the author of several books, including Misogyny, Projective Identification and Mentalization, and Aftermath, Healing from the Trump Presidency. Today, she is here to discuss how the psychoanalytic concept of projective identification, or what she terms as blame shifting, manifests in our relationships. Her new book, It's Not Me, It's You, How Narcissists Get What They Want and How to Stop Them, discusses just that. This is more of a self-help or guidebook that mentors the reader in ways to identify blame shifting and protect oneself from further abuse and manipulation. Dr. Messina, welcome back to the Psychology Talk Podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's a magnificent book. It really is. It's very succinct in a lot of ways of delivering some complex concepts in very simple ways that everyone can kind of understand. It's got great tips in it for how to handle these kind of situations with abusive people. And it goes into some bigger realms like human trafficking and more like systemic issues.
Well, thank you. I wrote this book. Actually, that was said well. I wrote this book to get this concept to the public or in the public arena because it's something that happens all the time. It's so pervasive. And yet projective identification, who actually knows what that means? Professionals don't know what it means. I often thought I'd give a test to people at my institute, just a little quiz to see how well they could describe it. But it's something that happens and it can be described in simple language. And that's what I wanted to do. That's why I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. It fundamentally, very simply put, it's a defense mechanism that narcissists, for example, and others, but narcissists use that it really hurts other people. They project things that they don't like about themselves onto someone else. And then they say, aha, you're the person who did this, or you're the person who said this, or behaved this way, et cetera, et cetera. It's not me. Therefore the title, It's Not Me, It's You.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, okay. So, and when this happens to a person, if they get embroiled or involved in a relationship, does it start initially? Does the kind of, I guess, gaslighting or blame shifting start initially, or does it start small and build up over time? Is it conscious or is it unconscious on the part of the person doing it?
That's an excellent question. I think you've been studying this stuff because projective.
I read your book, so I'm an expert. No, just kidding.
Projection itself is projecting something we don't like about ourselves onto someone else. Mm-hmm. Projective identification kicks in when the recipient starts to identify with it or is aware of it. Mm-hmm. For example, you could say something to me, and if I don't buy into it, or if I don't, as I said, identify with it, then it's pretty much projection. Mm-hmm. But if I start to take it in and wonder about it, now first in projective identification, the person is often just stunned. It's like, what? What did you say? I was talking to a patient this morning, and I've explained this in simple language many times. And she said, this is the first time I'm really getting it. When my mother used to say all those things to me, she wasn't talking about me. She was talking about herself. But it felt like me. It felt like I was bad. It felt like I did something wrong. But I don't think now, in retrospect, or thinking about it from this angle or this vantage point, I don't think I actually did that. I think this is something that she did all the time.
Wow.
So,
okay. Yeah.
So it happens in so many different situations, as you pointed out. I mean, domestic violence, human trafficking.
Yeah. And so this is, I get it that the book is kind of like it's super important for you, I think, because it's almost like you're speaking to the general audience in a kind of therapeutic manner. It seems like it's a lot. It's in your life work, I think.
I think that's true. I think when I hear about a case, somebody comes in and tells me about a domestic violence case, I think, I don't jump to conclusions. I try to think, well, now, could it be something else? Because that's always possible. Somebody could have thrown something in someone's face, and if they reacted, then it might be a different dynamic. Mm-hmm. But quite often, I find that it isn't a different dynamic, that the person is just going along minding their own business, and all of a sudden, something from the other person is put on them, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I often use the metaphor. It's sort of like green slime gets poured over someone, and then you just can't get it off.
No. So there has to be a point though when that blame shifting or the projection sinks into the person's brain, right, into their mind, their consciousness, and they actually start to believe it.
Yeah, then they think they're bad. They did it. They think it must be me. Right. I use an example often of a man, and it could be a woman, but I just initially thought of it as a man who's at work and has a difficult time with a meeting with his boss. Maybe he has a one-on-one and the boss says, hey, listen, Joe, you're just not cutting it. It's just not working out here. I'm going to put you on some kind of PIP, the performance improvement plan. This isn't working out. And so he said, look at this. I mean, your place is messy. Your office is messy, but I wouldn't care so much about that. But your deadlines, you're never on time with anything. So Joe's upset. Mm-hmm. He's mumbling things under his breath, but he knows it's not a good idea to get mad and rant and rave at the boss. So he holds it until he gets home. He walks in the house and he starts yelling at his wife. Look at these kids. Look how messy they are. Look how dirty they are. Look at this place. This is a mess. It might even end up in some sort of physical confrontation. Mm-hmm. Now, the woman's just there. Maybe she's cooking dinner. Maybe she's reading. Maybe she's doing work herself. Mm-hmm. But she's not doing anything. She hasn't done a thing yet. So in this example, I hope it's pretty clear that this is something about the person, the guy, Joe, something that happened at work. He doesn't like it. It doesn't feel good to be in this sort of meeting with the boss. So, but rather than face it and say, okay, now, what am I going to do about my situation at work? It's not looking good for me. I see that I've slacked off. I've got to clean up my act. Rather than that, he puts it on somebody else, in this case, his wife.
Okay, so shifting things like that. And so this can build up over time, correct? With the relationship where somebody, I mean, what are the dynamics? What kind of a person, besides being a very nice person and assuming that they're in the wrong and able to own the blame, but what kind of a person might wind up being stuck in this situation if maybe they could identify themselves, if anybody out there is in a relationship like that?
Well, if you're talking about the recipient.
Yeah, the recipient, yeah.
If somebody is really strong and knows themselves well and maybe's been in therapy and therefore is self-reflective, but they can be self-reflective without being in therapy for sure. Mm-hmm. And knows their strengths, knows their weaknesses, and just basically has self-awareness. If this man comes in, their husband Joe, and starts saying these things, immediately, if they're not susceptible to this, they say, wait a minute, you must have had a bad day. This is not about me or the kids or dinner or anything else. This is about you. So it'd be a good idea if you could just go someplace, maybe in your office, and calm down, because doesn't have a thing in the world to do with me. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, that doesn't happen because people are caught off guard. They're minding their own business, doing whatever, and someone comes in and starts rattling these things off. Mm-hmm. And so a person I think the first reaction is feeling stunned. Even if you think later, oh, no, Joe, this is about you. I think initially people are stunned.
Yeah. Okay. So they're unassuming. They're, like you said, they're caught off guard. And if you get enough of these little like chinks into your common sense, right, eventually it adds up and you find yourself in this kind of pattern of acquiescing to the person who's the blame shifter. Or in the worst case scenario, I mean, everybody does this, right? Like you get upset and at work, the boss says something and somebody says something on the street. And, if you're in a bad spot, you might take it out on your dog, yell at the dog for messing the house up or something, or someone else in your life. But generally speaking, you're talking about people who do this as it's in their blood, so to speak, right? It's in their personality functioning to do that a lot, to just really blame shift automatically. They probably don't even see they're doing it sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think this is a major feature of a narcissist. And that's why the title. I think narcissists use this defense mechanism a lot. Now, right. By the way, it's not that this person who had this problem with the boss is aware of doing it. It's unconscious. Right. It's just the way they navigate in the world. Mm-hmm. Whereas other people have used this, but not too much. Blame shifting is something else. Okay. You're being more conscious about it. It's just that I don't want to take the responsibility or the hit for this, so I'll put it on you. I think whether you like this person or whether you don't, I think Donald Trump is a good example. I mean, he doesn't assume blame for things. And I think he thinks that's a good thing. It appears that way from if you just watch him on television, he seems to think that it's good. He doesn't take responsibility. It's not him. I've never heard any news clip or any program where he's taken responsibility.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so if you have this kind of a person in your life, that can be very dangerous for those of us who are unassuming, just happy-go-lucky, going about our general lives. Yeah. But you did mention the person who can who feels secure in themselves, literally and metaphorically, right? They have a secure sense of self or attachment, right? They're well-adjusted, maybe some therapy. But what about the people out there who are in an abusive relationship? How can they kind of bolster themselves up internally to have that sense of security? Can you maybe give some examples that you describe in the book?
Sure. Well, that's why I wrote the book. And that's why in every category, whether it's being with bullies or mean girls or, as I said, domestic violence, racism, there are ways to think about it, to really do a self-assessment of what's going on between you and the other person or the other people. And then the major thing is to give back the projection, to get to a place. You can do it by yourself. Therapists also help, but to get to a place to say to the other person or group of people, no. However you say no, it's not just the word no, but mm-hmm. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to tolerate it. This isn't acceptable here. Mm-hmm. However you say no, when you get to that point of saying to the narcissist, I'm sorry, no, then you're on your way. It's a pretty good start down the path of not letting this really affect you in a major way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So being able to do that, though, it's easier sometimes said than done. What could you describe like ways a person can go about bolstering that sense of security and saying no?
Well, I think one key factor is having a good sense of having self-esteem. self-respect.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you don't have self-esteem and self-respect, it's pretty hard to do that by yourself. I think you need some kind of group, whether it's AA or whether it's group therapy or whether it's a therapist, many kinds of therapists, dynamic therapist, CBT, therapists, and many types of therapists, family therapy maybe. But I think you need another person in order to help you maybe see yourself differently or see yourself through someone else's eyes, and really to start to understand yourself. I mean, a lot of therapy is about self-reflection and self-understanding, knowing yourself. Like if there are roadblocks, let's get them out of the way so that you can see the world in a different way, in a better way for yourself. I often think of going to a therapist as a journey. Of course, this is a metaphor, but like going into a forest. If you go down a path that you've never been down before, and you're with somebody who has been down this path, chances are you can see where the pitfalls are. You can see where the dangerous curves in the path might be, as well as seeing beautiful things, pretty things, undiscovered things. So that's how I explain it to people often.
Okay, excellent. Well, maybe you did mention 3 areas that you do cover in the book. The mean girls issue, right? The kind of bullying thing in groups, racism and human trafficking. Maybe you can touch on each of those and kind of expand a little bit about what you talk about in the book.
Sure. Mean girls, it's interesting because mean girls are bullies. So why make two separate chapters? Mean girls or mean women are, I think they're more subtle in their criticisms. They're, like they exclude other women from groups or from parties. Men may do that, but I don't think they do it as much. They gossip. That's a mean girl thing. Obviously that hurts people, and it is actually projective identification again. Usually, if you really find out the core of the issue, there's something about the person or small group that they don't like about themselves, but rather than thinking maybe they're not so pretty or something, I'm thinking of teenagers now. If they say, "Oh, look at her! Look at how she dresses. No guy ever likes her." It's probably an insecurity about the person or the group. So there was one thing that Margaret Atwood said. It was a little poem of sorts. The children on the lawn joined hand in hand, go round and round. We might mistake this trance moving for joy, but there's no joy in it. And that's from the Circle game, just talking about the way girls can take others in and seem as though the person's part of the group, but then the person is ultimately excluded.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's kind of a systemic way that this can kind of blame shifting and or projective identification can kind of show up to affect people. Yep. What about in the area of human trafficking? I mean, you give some examples there.
Human trafficking is it's interesting. People often think, "Oh, human trafficking, that's something that happens in Africa or in South America." No, actually, that's not the only places where it happens. It happens here in America, in every city in America, and on a regular basis. And people, when I say that to people, they think, "Oh, no. You must be reading some, I don't know, that doesn't sound accurate." but the statistics are really, really high of the number of girls that are missing. Some are unhappy at home. Some slip away. They think they're going, I don't know, to the mall, and they're actually taken. And you think, oh, well, who's not going to report their kid? That's going to be an Amber Alert. That's going to be a big scene. It's going to be in the news everywhere. That doesn't always happen. There are places where it isn't a big event on the news that's reported day in and day out. Celebrity.
Yeah. I've had a couple guests on the show discuss their work with human trafficking, both here, helping to root it out and help the victims of it, both here and in Europe. And it's huge in Europe. And it's huge, not just in Southeast Asia and southern countries, but it takes place basically everywhere on the planet. Yeah. And it is a terrible situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that particular topic up, because I think if other people are similar to the way I was, I thought it was terrible, but I thought it happened in other places. And also, it's pretty profitable.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. And that's precisely like people's lack of awareness is what keeps it underground. And so therefore it can spread more easily. Yeah. And I think domestic servants, sometimes people in domestic servant situations are kind of in a human trafficking situation, all the way to more like sex workers kind of situations. Yeah. Well, you bring up some example. I thought you mentioned prostitution in that section. Maybe some examples from that chapter you could talk about.
Well, sometimes, let's see. Women are pulled into the drug trade, the underworld of drug dealings. Mm-hmm. And then they're given drugs, they get hooked on them, and they're forced to become prostitutes. And they don't have a way of escaping. And one thing I read, I don't know if it's this book or part of another book, but one woman who did manage to escape and go back to her family said one of the most humiliating things is that pimps will take away their underwear. And somehow and I can imagine, it's extremely humiliating. But when you weave in, how one weaves in projective identification is that many of these people who are involved in this, let's say pimps, they come from really horrendous backgrounds. So I'm not in any way sticking up for pimps, but they didn't come from a great house in a city or the suburbs or any place else where there was a wonderful family. They come from very dysfunctional situations.
Yeah.
No excuse, but it's important to recognize that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then topic of racism, you mentioned as well, like how does projective identification, I think I know where you'll go with it. I haven't read the book, but like how does that manifest as racism? And it's not just like black versus white. It's like any particular in-group, out-group dynamic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think that, take the case of racism. Often people who are racist, and by the way, I wrote something and I was quoting someone, I'm not sure of the author, but he said, all white people are racist, not because of the way they think necessarily, but because of the privilege they have. Just by waking up being white, there's privilege involved in that. You don't have to face things that a black person has to face. One of my patients has really brought this home to me, that my waking up and going to the store is not like her waking up and going to the store. It's just a different scenario. It doesn't matter what part of the city we're in. She's looked at differently than I am. So anyway, getting back to the main question. So people if they grow up, just say in a very functional family, there's often somebody in the family who has negative feelings and says negative things about some other culture, another race, about Black people, or perhaps, I don't know this, but perhaps Black people, or I guess they do say negative things about white people. According to my patients, that's what they've said. So if they have this negative feeling, maybe they picked some racism up from their grandfather, or I don't know about great grandfather, but we'll say their grandfather. They think of themselves as very liberal and very fair-minded, and they like all kinds of people. It doesn't matter what race the person comes from or what culture. Mm-hmm. But still, there's some lingering thing. Oh, yeah, I remember Grandpa used to say X. It just lingers there. So they don't want it. Mm-hmm. So that the wish is to get rid of it and to say, no, that's not me. You're sitting there, Scott, and I think you're probably thinking these things about these people that came from this other country that was just on the news last night. Well, I thought it was, I want to send money to this cause. This doesn't have anything to do with me, but it could have something to do with you. Because it's not pleasant for me to think that I would have a thought about this group of people from X country. So you might think it, though. So people can get into that. With that, it's not that I'm here thinking about this scenario for purposes of explanation, but people don't think about it because projective identification is not a conscious thing. Now, I could just say all this to you, and if you don't identify with it at all, and you say to yourself, Karyn, that's pretty far out. That's not me at all. That's you. And later, maybe when we're not on the air, so to speak, you say, when you use that example, that isn't reflective of my thinking at all. So you might want to give that some thought, because maybe that's your thought, but it's not mine. Mm-hmm. Then maybe it's just projection. You're not identifying with it. You're not taking this on, and you don't think it has a thing to do with you, and maybe it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So that would be just projection.
Okay.
If I were doing this by design, and I thought that I was really wonderful and terrific, and I never did anything wrong, and I'm just the best thing in the world, then I might be aware of doing it. If I did it, I may be doing it to put it on you. So that's where blame shifting, I'm not the one who has this stuff. No way. That's you.
Okay. Yeah, so
I read it in something you wrote. That's you.
It's more nuanced than just, like straight up.
Yeah, it's nuanced. Yeah.
Bigotry. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess what you're getting at is that sometimes people can unconsciously project that. Blame shifting would be totally different. So you're kind of, the distinction is one is more conscious or very conscious, one is not. Projective identification is more of a reaction that you do rather than something that's by design, where you're constantly looking out to protect your ego from any sort of negative inference by always projecting it onto anyone around you. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. So I guess in the case of human trafficking, that is blame shifting. Like what goes on in that is probably more of that, for instance, like consciously manipulating people, taking away their underwear, humiliating them, getting them addicted to something, and then utilizing blame shifting to keep the power differential in, I guess, for instance, a pimp's court.
I think that's likely to be true, but just say if this pimp was treated horribly as a child,
okay,
And suppose that something similar happened to him. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be exactly the same, but something similar. Maybe he had to go do some sort of drug pickup. He was forced to do it by older people in his group, his maybe older brothers or something, and he didn't want to do it, but he was forced to do something that was really terrible. Mm-hmm. He might have, it could have become part of his daily living, his culture. It's what he did. So it could be just kind of what he does. So if you were to do that, and yes, that I would say that would be probably blame shifting, because you would not be somebody who was subjected to this. I'm assuming, I'm making assumptions, but I'm assuming that you weren't subjected to a life of poverty as a child, where you had to go on the streets and pick up drugs for a sale. Mm-hmm. So I think it wouldn't be an automatic thing. I think you probably put more thought into doing it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, right. Exactly. So I think we're on the same page about that. Well, can you explain a little bit more, like, if anybody's out there listening to this, they're in a situation where they're being gaslit, or there's blame shifting going on, what could they do? What could people in the audience do besides reading your book to have some insight? What could they do to shore things up for themselves?
I think in the moment when something happens, if they think to themselves, okay, wait a minute, I need to think about this. If somebody said they did something, I have to give this some thought. Now, is this something I know about myself? I mean, you can do that just, if you've never done it before, you can do it right now. Mm-hmm. Is this something that I've ever done before? Have I ever been a mess? Just to say I'm an OCD type and everything's always tidy. Someone says, look at it, you're just such a mess. You never do anything. The dishes are always dirty, this, that, or whatever. Or your clothes. Look at you. You're just a mess today. And you think, really? I mean, I don't think so. I spend a fair amount of money. It doesn't matter. You get your clothes at a secondhand store, but you think about how you look, say. Mm-hmm. And somebody's saying these things about it. You think, that doesn't fit. I don't think so. That must be something to do with them. Maybe they're having a bad day. They got up on the wrong side of the bed, but I don't think so. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Whereas if somebody says something and think, oh my God, really? I feel so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. And maybe your face, I mean, you can't really help it if your face turns red, because it's embarrassing. But it's a matter of catching it and thinking, is this me or is this other person? Mm-hmm. So that's what people can do in the moment. Stop and think, and catch this projection as if it's maybe a ball thrown at them, just to catch it and hold it and think, and then hold on to it and process it, or throw it back to the person and say, no, this is not me.
So it's that gap between reactance and thinking. So taking a pause, not reacting and on what's being said or done. Right. But taking a pause and saying, does this belong to me?
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept. A lot of people, I don't think they realize that they have a choice in how they think about themselves in social settings.
I think you're right. And this does take some practice, because the automatic thing, I believe, is to think either to feel stunned or to feel terrible that this thing has been said to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're just caught off guard. Like, what do you mean I've gained weight? First of all, I mean, people don't generally say that to others in a social setting. But if they did, maybe they hadn't, but maybe the other person did, and they just wanted to put it on someone else. If they said, oh, you look a little different than before the pandemic. Did you put on weight? It may be about the weight the person put on. But the best thing to do is just stop and think, Did I? Maybe. Did I? I don't think so. I lost, I gained that 7 pounds, but I think I lost it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. I think that we're built, so to speak, to automatically kind of have an I-thou relationship, if you will, or to have like a mentalizing relationship, right? Or to communicate with others, assuming that we understand what they're saying, that we kind of grok what they're saying, we get it holistically immediately. So it's easy for people who understand the dynamics of blame shifting and using it to get in through our defense mechanisms or just through our logic. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like learning a little bit different social dynamics. And as you mentioned, like group therapy would be a way to do that, right? Like stopping. Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very good spot for people to like learn. Well, wait a minute, you're saying this. Is it really within the context of what everyone is talking about here, and helping people rise above kind of reactance in social settings and learn to accept themselves and feel more comfortable accepting themselves and others, or individual therapy. Yeah. Yeah.
That could be less threatening sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
Some kind of peer group, or the peer group can have a leader, but in some setting where you're talking among other people who are like-minded or like you, or you think are like you, to talk about some of these ideas. If someone hasn't been in therapy and that's intimidating, then it may be a good way to start. I think that's why Alcoholics Anonymous is so popular. I mean, people get into that and go for years and years, mm-hmm. because even if they haven't had anything to drink, I don't think it's always to keep them from drinking. I think sometimes it's the sense of community and belonging, and then mm-hmm. through that they do get understanding of some of the issues that they have and others have.
Well, also, I mean, the 12 steps, everybody could do 12 steps. They don't have to have alcoholism to do them. Right. They're just sensible, right. Common sense ways of, like, did I do something wrong? Do I make amends with people? How do I reset this thing called me? Mm-hmm. And I think that's generally it's group dynamics of therapy and everything. It's very practical, logical, thinking. Yeah.
I like that. Reset this thing called me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with regards to the book or these concepts or anything else, Karyn?
Well, I have a term that I came up with, and nobody knows what it means because I more or less manufactured it, but I think the concept is important. And it's redactional identification. Basically, it has to do with what I sort of alluded to before, which is going on a journey with somebody else. If just a couple of quick paragraphs, if I could read these, that might be useful. Mm-hmm. In spite of the difficulties you have encountered in life, it is possible to find a person who can help you change old patterns that negatively affect you. In other words, you can connect with another person who can help you change the way you do things, so the future doesn't have to be like the past. In one of my books, my first book, I think, I quoted this from Louis Cossolino. Mm-hmm. Do you know him?
No.
Anyway, he said, you can begin by making clients aware of more than one narrative arc of their life story, and then help them understand that change is possible and offer alternative storylines. As the editing process proceeds, new narrative arcs emerge as the possibilities to experiment with new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. In essence, therapists hope to teach their clients that they are more than the present story, but can also be editors and new authors of new stories.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that editing idea.
Yeah. So Redactive identification?
Redactional.
Redactional identification.
It's the idea of redacting, like taking out the parts. And obviously you can't just pull them out, but you can change. And therefore the other ways aren't there anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's the concept of like, you see someone, you talk about an issue, you think about it, you come back, your story changes over time, right? Yeah. Memory, reconsolidation of memories. Yeah. Rewriting the narrative. Yeah. And so there is hope for people out there who might be suffering from these situations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, any other thoughts before we sign off?
No, just try to be aware of narcissists in the world because there are a lot of them.
They seem to be growing too. Yeah.
To label people, but it just happens that there are quite a few. If just look at the news, politicians and nobody else. It's an education.
I would agree.
So,
and it seems to be an emotional contagion these days. It seems like there's more of them, right? Just, I don't know if that's my projecting that onto it, but it seems like it, statistically.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Dr. Karyne Messina, the book is It's Not Me, It's You, How Narcissists Get What They Want and How to Stop Them. And it's available everywhere?
It's available on Amazon and through the publisher. It's Cascade Books.
Okay, excellent. And people can reach you online at?
They can reach me on my website, which is Karyne-Messina.com.
Okay.
And my email address is so it's dr. Karyn, the way it's spelled, KARYNEMESSINA @gmail.com.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Messina.
Thank you very much. It was very enjoyable, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.